BlackBerry, the first smartphone everyone had to have. It put the world at your fingertips and forever changed how we work and interact. People were so addicted to it, they called it the CrackBerry. So how did something so loved fall out of touch with consumers? This is the story that explains how the phone to die for became the one you wouldn't be caught dead with.
I am the greatest. My power of iterated. Yeah. History I'm creating. It's there for the taking. It's destiny in the making. It's destiny in the making.
When I first saw a mobile phone, it was a car phone. This is exactly it. Oh my God, this was exactly it. This is, no kidding, like £5. Initially, when cell phones came out, they were wildly expensive. Only the richest people could have them.
Go where you wanna go, call when you wanna call.
The whole game changed when carriers started to subsidize phones, so the consumer could actually have them for a reasonable price, but it would come with a 2-year contract.
At an incredible value of $3.99, only at Radio Shack.
I had a really small Nokia phone.
All it had was just the number pad, and you could play Snake and make calls.
While the new consumer cell phone market was exploding, the cell tower network was still being built, and dropped calls were the norm.
I was gonna wait till you got home, but I can't.
What is it?
We're pregnant! Honey?
Nokia is the behemoth in the telecom and mobile space.
But Research in Motion, the company that would become BlackBerry, had a different idea of where to take wireless communication.
I'm Sean Silkoff. I'm a technology journalist based in Canada with the Globe and Mail, and I'm also the co-author of Losing the Signal, about the rise and fall of BlackBerry. Research in Motion started out above a bagel store in Waterloo, Ontario. Tiny, scrappy, and very far from Silicon Valley. Research in Motion was really two people, Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie. So you've got Mike, who's the scientific genius. Then you've got Jim, who was a corporate shark. He was intense, he was strategic, he could be terrifying. Mike's high school teacher told him the person who marries wireless communications and a computer is going to create something special.
Research in Motion deviated from other cell phone companies. Instead of making a voice phone, they went after a data network that no one was using.
It's quite astonishing to think that at the time, mobile phones were really catching on and the networks were filling up quickly, and you had this empty network for wireless data because no one had figured out the killer app. And BlackBerry did, and it was email.
BlackBerry wanted to make an old pager network seem state-of-the-art.
And they wouldn't even do voice calls, which seemed insane at the time.
They wanted to dominate text and add something even more powerful.
My name is Charles Meyer. I was their first lawyer. We came to the marketplace with an email-centric focus.
They've got this nice little device that's offering wireless email.
Being alerted that you have an email to react to was the killer app before people even talked about apps.
BlackBerry also changed how you could text and email.
T9 was the only way that you could text on these phones, and T9 was essentially like texting Morse code. You had to know how many times to hit a button to change it to the next letter. It took a lot of time to text.
When BlackBerry came out, they had the full keyboard.
The fact it had a QWERTY keyboard. I actually wrote the patent application on the placement of the keys to allow you to use your thumbs to type.
But for companies to allow employees to use business emails wirelessly, they had to feel secure.
One of the core expertises of the company was cryptography. They used what was called triple DES encryption. It was so secure that it would take supercomputers a long time to crack it.
BlackBerry had found a small market with business users, but then something would happen that would change their reputation forever.
The The biggest shift for BlackBerry was on September 11th.
Landlines were down, cellular lines were down.
Too many people were trying to connect, and the networks were all jammed.
I only know what I've heard on television. I've tried to speak to some friends, obviously. Phone lines, communication is difficult.
But because BlackBerry functioned on data, it was on a completely different network, so people could actually send text messages and emails, and first responders could get in contact with each other.
When there's so much uncertainty, one device came through.
The only way that politicians in Washington could communicate with each other were on BlackBerries, but only a few people had BlackBerries. Weeks later, when DC got back to business, one of the first things that happened was that every member of the House of Representatives was issued a BlackBerry. Soon it became the device that everyone in political power in Washington and elsewhere had to have.
Not only was BlackBerry now seen as the most reliable device, its encryption made it the only device for some.
They were the only technology company that was trusted to be able to attach to all the major Fortune 500 companies.
Then BlackBerry came out with the 5810 device, their first ever voice calling phone. And now there was no reason not to have a BlackBerry.
You didn't have to tell your boss you had a BlackBerry, and you didn't have to tell your IT department you had a BlackBerry. But once you had a BlackBerry, everyone else on your floor, everyone you worked with, saw that you had a BlackBerry, and then they wanted a BlackBerry. And one day the IT department would wake up and there would be 500 BlackBerries inside the organization. And some of their first customers were very powerful CEOs like Michael Dell and Bill Gates from Microsoft.
And it kind of led to like the work from anywhere culture.
People were addicted to the thumb typing, what was called the BlackBerry prayer.
People started before long nicknaming it the CrackBerry because it was so addictive.
It made people always on their phone. So it started this whole heads down movement.
Oh, you're gonna do the BlackBerry head down thing on me now? What is with the BlackBerry people?
And then came BlackBerry Messenger.
With BBM, it was a really cool innovation because not only could they text for free, I mean, texting cost a lot of money back then, you had to pay per text, but it was kind of like a status symbol too.
BlackBerry literally went from being a lifeline to a pickup line.
BBM is driving a lot of adoption. They scored the best promotional spot you can get.
It sends and receives email messages,
which is the Oprah Christmas special.
BlackBerry!
The crowd just went mad when they heard they were getting BlackBerry. Everyone at Research in Motion headquarters was watching this, and they just couldn't believe it. There was a lot of high fives that day.
There were really no oncoming threats until one day that just completely shifted everything.
And we are calling it iPhone.
In 2007, Steve Jobs was presenting at one of his Apple conferences.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
And he announced the iPhone.
People went nuts.
The iPhone at his announcement was a direct attack on BlackBerry and all competitors.
Here's 4 smartphones, right? Motorola Q, the BlackBerry.
They're actually hard to use.
They all have these keyboards that are there whether you need them or not.
And I'm gonna create something that's light years ahead of them.
We're gonna get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen.
When they didn't have much competition before, they now have an amazing competitor in Apple.
If Steve were here, what would you say to him?
Well, the first thing I would say is you finally showed up.
BlackBerry didn't really see the iPhone coming out as any sort of threat. They were like, oh, that feels more like a toy.
Other companies had tried to compete in the smartphone market, but all of these devices failed.
We own the business market. We're secure. We're encrypted.
It's the only approved solution for many governments and law enforcement around the world. And that's why it's become #1 worldwide.
Mike and Jim were not that impressed. Mike was concerned that the touchscreen was going to eat up battery life, which it did.
I think the first week I used my iPhone, I may have to charge it 6 times before I charged my BlackBerry.
So the arrival of the iPhone didn't change everything for Research in Motion. In fact, the company continued to grow quite well. It was one of the fastest growing companies in the world. Then what happens is this massive opportunity lands in their lap.
Verizon wanted to be able to compete with the touchscreen.
Verizon had actually passed on the opportunity to have the iPhone.
In 2008, Verizon asks BlackBerry, the most powerful smartphone brand on the planet, to take on Steve Jobs and Apple.
Verizon is asking them for an iPhone killer with a $100 million marketing campaign for the big season for the launch of the latest smartphone, which is the Thanksgiving Christmas season, 2008. This was the biggest order they'd ever had. So this was showtime for BlackBerry.
And they only had 9 months to do it.
Can you do it in 9 months when it normally would take you 18?
A lot of people were worried and didn't think they could do it, but time and again they had delivered devices, so they didn't think it would be any different this time. They'd never built a device like this. It required a whole lot of new expertise that BlackBerry didn't have.
So they went to work to try to create something very quickly that Steve Jobs and his team had worked many, many years to build and unveil.
And that's exactly what a visionary does, right? Especially when you got two of them. Just tell me the deadline, give me the money, and I'll figure it out.
What they came up with was their version of a touchscreen, the Storm.
BlackBerry built the Storm's touchscreen to have something the iPhone didn't have.
The keyboard.
They know that their consumer really likes the feeling of the buttons. So they released something called SurePress, where it actually feels like you're pushing a button on their touchscreen.
You've never clicked a screen before. Is that supposed to happen? Is it supposed to feel so right? America's largest 3G network introduces the world's first touchscreen BlackBerry.
The Storm was a success. Verizon sells 1 million devices in 1 year.
But very quickly, the Storm unleashed a tsunami of problems.
The touchscreen would freeze often.
It was slow, it was buggy.
It doesn't respond to a light tap like the iPhone would.
We're not exactly sure what the problem is, whether it just has issues registering presses.
When people typed on it, they found when you were typing letters near the edge of the device, it wasn't registering.
Everybody's phones were physically falling apart.
Nearly all of the 1 million devices that went out were returned.
And this led to a $500 million loss for BlackBerry.
Our development cycle needed a certain amount of time. They didn't have it with Storm because Verizon wanted to launch by Christmas time.
And what I can't believe is that they actually knew that the phone was not going to work, opposed to going to Verizon and saying, hey, it's not there, the phone is not up to par.
Research in Motion left an opening because Verizon still needed an iPhone killer because AT&T had this exclusive for years for the iPhone.
Because of the Storm's massive failure, Verizon had no confidence in BlackBerry to deliver a successful device.
So instead, they turned to two other companies, Google and Motorola, and they worked together to develop the Droid.
This was the birth of the Android operating system. However, despite the Storm's misstep, BlackBerry's brand was so strong that new users were still eager for their traditional keyboard phones.
BlackBerry sales continued to go up, and they actually peaked over the year 2010-2011. They hit $19.9 billion in sales.
People were still obsessed with a BlackBerry, and they were getting these unpaid celebrity endorsements constantly. Kim Kardashian swore by hers.
A BlackBerry, it's my heart and soul. Like, I love it. I'll never get rid of it.
Drake wrote all his songs on his.
The greatest salesman of all was Barack Obama.
I'm still clinging to my BlackBerry. They're gonna pry it out of my hands.
He didn't want to give his up.
Corporations were not going to let you use the iPhone to do any work, but for fun, you end up carrying two phones. So you had a work phone and then like a play phone.
Everyone was carrying two phones back in the day. If you had a job where someone was paying for your BlackBerry, you carried two phones because the BlackBerry did not deliver fun experiences.
They carry both of them, like you're inconveniencing your consumer, right? By not innovating for them, by not giving them what they want.
Somebody had to adapt to be able to take over as the device.
New iPhone or BlackBerry, which company's gonna take it?
BlackBerry is at war with Apple and Android for smartphone supremacy, with each company touting its features.
So what's the best that we were really trained to know about BlackBerry? Reliability.
A BlackBerry blackout is going on all around the world right now.
Problems with the smartphone system have now spread.
People could not send or receive BlackBerry messages.
This was a significant outage.
It's just a big brick, you can't use it, you can't do anything with it.
It took out BlackBerries around the world. Things had to fail in a particular fashion in order for you to have an outage of that nature.
Since Monday, BlackBerry customers have been unable to use their mobile internet
for 3 long days and nights.
I apologize for the service outages this week.
And it was a disaster.
Imagine if right now every Tesla on the road stopped working for 3 days. It would be mass hysteria in electronic vehicle space. But that actually happened to BlackBerry.
But let me assure you that we're working round the clock to fix this.
In that moment, the idea of everything that they stand for, of why they are better compared to everyone in the market that's building these phones, they didn't come through.
It was the last thing this company needed.
As BlackBerry took a hit in the business community, the iPhone and Android were building up their security.
So now corporations see that Android and Apple are becoming secure and they're letting people have them on their networks.
With BlackBerry's security advantage gone, having an all-in-one phone was possible.
For the consumer, the question was, which one had what they wanted?
BlackBerry just didn't have the App Store or the underlying software that could really support a competitive app environment to Google and Apple.
They saw the apps that were coming out on the iPhone as just toys to them.
I don't need a YouTube app to go to YouTube. The web shouldn't be an app.
They didn't think that there was any value in creating or having apps altogether.
Apps like Netflix, like Instagram were not available on BlackBerry. And apps, remember, were driving the adoption of smartphones.
Now under siege from iPhone and Android, the two CEOs start to split on what to do.
Jim is trying to figure out what the company is supposed to be. And, BBM is driving a lot of adoption. Jim Balsillie comes up with the idea, why don't we do a cross-platform BBM? Let's take BBM and make it available on every smartphone. Like WhatsApp, over in Asia there's KakaoTalk. We could create the one instant messaging app to rule them all. And his view was handsets are dead. Meanwhile, Mike, on his side of the shop, is working on the opposite strategy, which is to ensure handsets have a future by creating a new operating system.
Now you've got two co-CEOs, they can't agree, and they've got the big behemoths, Steve Jobs and Apple, coming for what's left of them.
These CEOs are not communicating anymore.
So here's two guys that used to share an office. It's kind of sad.
There were always tensions because they have different views of the world. Whenever Mike and Jim were in disagreement, Mom and Dad are fighting again.
So essentially you're creating these teams against each other.
And so when this happens to two CEOs, there's only one thing that can happen. They gotta go.
It's a tragedy for the two men that this great friendship that created this great company is no more.
They named one of their lieutenants on Mike's side of the shop, Torsten Heinz, to be the new CEO.
I'm absolutely excited. This is so fantastic and phenomenal to become the CEO.
One of the first things he does after he becomes CEO is to kill SMS 2.0. The BBM cross-platform program is dead.
The new CEO hopes to bring the company into the future by opening up the BlackBerry OS to third-party developers.
The part that's tough about that is 5 years too late. Google and Apple already have thousands of developers, millions of new apps.
But Heinz is convinced that once the App Store is up and running, BlackBerry can win back customers with a killer feature and return to the glory days.
What is the single best way you're going to hook them back with these new things?
With BlackBerry's market share crumbling, the new CEO, Torsten Heinz, needs a bold move to get back customers.
What is the single best way you're going to hook them back?
The physical keypad, because what I hear from a lot of them, give me that keypad instead of the full touch device.
BlackBerry comes up with this genius idea to launch something called the BlackBerry Classic.
Retro and smartphones, it didn't seem like a winning strategy, it wasn't.
Developers never came to BlackBerry, so they went where the developers were, Google's Android. Ironically, Android had been created for Verizon because of BlackBerry's failed touchscreen, the Storm.
The company did eventually make it their operating system.
This is the last attempt to save everything, and they're partnering with Android.
And this was a step in the right direction because people could have all the benefits of Android, but still retain this physical keyboard that BlackBerry is known for. And at this point, they're really the only provider of the physical keyboard.
It was a bit of a kludge. It didn't work well as an Android device or a BlackBerry device, in my opinion.
BlackBerry's market share has been in free fall for years, and after possibly the biggest string of flops in smartphone history. In 2016, BlackBerry gave up and stopped making phones altogether.
Devices using the company's legacy operating systems no longer work as of today.
BlackBerry lives on, creating cybersecurity software for the car industry, but its name will always be synonymous with the device that launched the smartphone era. These two co-CEOs built a company that really trained behaviors. They taught us how to interact. They brought the business world into our personal lives because we could work longer from different locations.
BlackBerry changed the world with its innovation, but then it lost track of how people wanted to use that technology.
And that involved having social media, understanding that social media in your hand was going to keep people connected in a new way, and it was going to become necessary.
Now, today, we're communicating through apps. We're communicating through social media. They missed the boat.
The bad decision was perhaps not going down the path that Jim Balsley wanted the company to go down.
BBM was being used around the world. Imagine if we had an instant messenger today that was as powerful as Facebook. And if BlackBerry had acted at the right time, and if they made BBM available on all devices, it may have had that. It's the great what if of the BlackBerry story.
Even though it never reached its full potential, BlackBerry Messenger is actually still around.
I didn't realize that they still had BBM. I thought that was long dead.
It's available on iPhone and Android.
It's so miserable, they don't want me to go, but these suckers couldn't see me and they like toe to toe. One finger in the air like they Matumbo. Now they unplugging my mic trying to stop my flow. Hold up, somebody tell me to go.